Last week we talked about evaluating your sources, and this week we're going to build on that a little more and talk about how to avoid plagiarism and to properly do APA citations of those wonderful sources that you've found. And so our objectives are to demonstrate an understanding of especially summary and APA citations, that's our focus, and understand how to avoid plagiarism through effective citations. And we're going to look at how to effectively quote, paraphrase, and summarize. And I love this little cartoon, maybe because I've taught in a junior high level before, and this is a little too familiar at that level. And so like the kid here says, "What do you mean all my facts are wrong? I copied everything straight off the internet." And I know as adults, we know that copying things word for word is not right, that it's plagiarism. But let's look at, because plagiarism can get a little gray and it can get a little foggy and fuzzy. So let's look exactly at what plagiarism is. So this is from the Ameritech Student Catalog, and it says plagiarism: using another person's ideas, evidence, or words without proper acknowledgement, or conveying the false impression that the arguments in writing in a paper are one's own. A student must always submit work that represents his or her original words or ideas. Words or ideas that do not represent the original work of a student must be cited to include all relevant sources. The extent to which such sources were used should also be made clear. All submissions provided in any Ameritech class forum fall within the scope of words and ideas that require citations if used by someone other than the original author. The work of a student that does not follow these standards will be considered plagiarism and violates the spirit of academic integrity. And so then there's some different examples. Plagiarism includes, but is not limited to, the following. 1. Acquiring by purchase or otherwise a part of or an entire document of work, which is represented as one's own. I know that there are actually sites out there that you can buy an essay, and while that is considered, like, I've looked at some of these sites before just to see what they're all about, not to use them, and while they will make it sound like it's just being more efficient with your time, that's actually plagiarism, and it's not something that you want to get caught up in. Another is representing the ideas, data, or writing of another person's as one's own work, even though some wording, method of citation, or arrangement of evidence, ideas, or arguments have been altered. 3. Concealing the true sources of information, ideas, or argument in any piece of work. In other words, plagiarism is not giving credit when using another person's words or ideas. And this is from the APA manual. Researchers do not claim the words and ideas of another as their own. They give credit where credit is due. So I provided some examples, and this is from the Noreen Rail Falcon Library. These are some examples of plagiarism: turning in someone else's work as your own, copying large pieces of text from a source without citing that source, taking a passage from multiple sources, piecing them together, and turning in the work as your own, copying from a source but changing a few words and phrases to disguise plagiarism, paraphrasing from a number of different sources without citing those sources, turning in work that you did for another class without getting your professor's permission first, buying an essay or paper and turning it in as your own work. Now, I didn't think that plagiarism was a major issue, and I used to not really address it all that much. I would say, don't plagiarize at the beginning of the semester. But I remember I had one student who, in a few weeks, you'll be doing a PowerPoint presentation. And I had done a sample presentation, just like with the other assignments we've done in this class, where, I wanted the students to be able to see kind of what I was expecting. And the student he submitted my PowerPoint presentation, and he had changed the background on it, and he had changed like some of the wording, but it was almost identical to my presentation. And I felt like my topic was pretty specific because I was looking at migraines and colic in babies, and I had put in some of my own information, and I felt a little bit, I don't know, what's the word? Offended maybe that he had taken my work and just submitted it as his own. He'd put his name on it. And, at first I tried to give him the benefit of the doubt. I thought, well, maybe he just accidentally submitted the sample instead of submitting his own. But then there were places where he had put his name on it, and there were the things that he had changed. And so then I became angry because I thought, how dare this student take my work and claim it as his own and then turn it into me? Like, did he think I wouldn't notice that this was my presentation? Does he think I don't look at these? And I was very angry. And after I finally calmed down, I contacted this student and we had a discussion about it. And as we discussed the issue, I realized that he really did not mean to cheat. He wasn't trying to plagiarize my presentation. He honestly did not realize that what he was doing was plagiarism. And he had just thought, I really like her topic. I want to learn more about that. I want to write my paper on this. And so then he took my presentation and tried to make it his own. However, he didn't give me credit for the work that I had done. And so you want to be careful because that's what plagiarism is. It's cheating. It's offensive to the person who is the original source. And so, well, let's just look at reasons to plagiarize. You waited until the last minute to complete an assignment and don't have time to do it correctly. That's a reason that comes up very often. Other writers say things so much better than you do. You have no idea how to properly cite sources, or you don't care about the rules. You're an exception to the rules. So those are the main reasons why people plagiarize. But let's look at why you shouldn't plagiarize. And these are just a few examples. In 2012, Paul Schmidt resigned as president of Hungary. So this is a president of a country due to allegations of plagiarism in his 1992 doctoral thesis. A president of a country resigned because of plagiarism. Like, that's insane to me. In 2008, Allison Routman, a senior at Ohio University, was expelled from a study abroad program after copying 3 phrases from Wikipedia. 3 phrases, expelled from a study abroad program. In 2006, Kavya Viswanathan's young adult novel was removed from store shelves, taken out of print, and her book contract was terminated after it was discovered that she had plagiarized from other novels. So those are just a few examples. If you want, you can go to this website and look at more examples of plagiarism. It is something that shouldn't be, but it is prevalent, and it's especially prevalent in colleges and universities. And it's a bad choice, and it can have bad consequences. You know, like if a president of a country could resign because of it, you need to be careful. And I know here at Ameritech, we are very big on academic integrity, and that if you cheat or plagiarize, you run the chance of either being withdrawn from the class or withdrawn from the program at Ameritech. So, like it says here, like these are some of the, this is from the Ameritech Student Catalog: a failing grade for the assignment, failing grade for the course, probation, suspension, or expulsion from the program, depending on the degree of plagiarism. It is a serious problem. So how do you avoid plagiarism? And the biggest thing you can do is to cite, cite, cite. When in doubt, cite. And I know, like I said, sometimes this can be a gray area, because I know there's one professor who told me once that she thinks that it's plagiarism when, if you're filling out a worksheet and you're writing answers from your textbook on the worksheet, she feels like you need to have a citation for every answer you write, because you're taking those answers straight from your textbook. And for me, I was like, well, I don't know if that's plagiarism, because that's kind of expected, that that's where you're getting the answers is from the textbook. But so there can be little differences of opinion, but for the most part, if you are taking ideas from someone else, you need to give credit. And I like to say, if it's not common knowledge or a common person would need to look up the information, you should probably cite it. So if I say the sky is blue, that's common knowledge. I don't need to cite that. But if I go into a lengthy description of why the sky is blue, I would probably need to back that up with research, and I would need to cite that. And like I say here, even if you're an expert in what you're writing about, you should back up your claims with research and then cite that search. So, you might be a world-renowned heart surgeon writing about heart surgery, but it doesn't hurt to back that up with other experts and then to give them credit, because that shows that you're not the only one that has this knowledge. The more people that collaborate, the closer you are to solid truth. And so with academic integrity, there are 3 ways to incorporate the words or ideas of another in your writing. They are direct quotations, paraphrasing, and summarizing. So summarizing, that's fairly self-explanatory. You're going to summarize a larger text into a smaller text. So with summarizing, you must reference the original source. The text is much shorter than the original text. For example, one may write a single page to summarize a 4-page article. You must use your own words, usually with a very limited use of quotations. And so where I've seen summarizing most often, especially in essays like what you are writing, would be summarizing a study. So you're using a study to back up one of your points, and you say, okay, in Green and Anderson's study of this, they tested this, this is what they did, this is what they found. And you give a summary of that study. And I would definitely need a citation for that. Paraphrasing is when you use your own words. And again, you must reference the original source. You need to have a citation. The text produced may be shorter or it might be longer than the original text. But the important thing is you need a citation. And then there's direct quotes or quoting. You must reference the original source. The text produced is the exact length of the original text quoted, unless you use ellipses, which are the 3 dots. You use the original author's exact words, and you use quotation marks to show that this is a direct quote. And if you have the time, I would recommend watching these different videos about doing paraphrasing, direct quotes, summarizing. And here's just a little note on direct quotations versus paraphrasing. Ameritext suggests, as you may or may not be aware, at the baccalaureate level of education, it is encouraged to paraphrase and not directly quote other authors unless the quote is impactful or makes a significant point in your written work. So, in other words, use direct quotes sparingly. I like to say that direct quotes are like pepper in cooking. A little bit of pepper goes a long way. If I'm writing, for example, you're writing a 7-page essay, I might use up to 2 direct quotes, but not much more. Now, this is not a rule that's set in stone. For example, the essay I'm working on right now, just in my introduction, I've already got 3 direct quotes. But you want to use direct quotes not as fillers. You don't want to use a direct quote because you're trying to take up space. And you don't want to use a direct quote because you don't want to take the time to put it into your own words. You want to use direct quotes when it is something that is said so powerfully, that has such an impact that the words, changing the words, would take away from that impact. Then you would use a direct quote. But the problem you run into is if you use a lot of direct quotes, that makes your writing choppy because you have your writing style and the person that you're quoting has their writing style. And so every time you insert a direct quote, you're kind of making that choppy and it's not as smooth. And sometimes it can be considered lazy writing. I just don't have the time. I don't want to take the time to put this in my own words. And paraphrasing shows that you have internalized the information and you've made it your own, and it makes a smoother incorporation of ideas. Paraphrasing shows that you've kind of melded these ideas together to form a more solid idea. So we recommend paraphrasing over direct quotes, and so try to just use direct quotes as sparingly as possible. So here are some tips for effectively using quotations and paraphrasing. Using the words of others can be tricky business. You typically only want to use a direct quotation in the following situations. If you're using that statement as a piece of evidence for your own argument, if you're establishing another's position, or if another person has said something better and more clearly than you can. The main problem with using quotations happens when writers assume that the meaning of the quotation is obvious. Writers who make this mistake believe that their job is done when they've chosen a quotation and inserted it into the text. Quotations need to be taken from their original context and integrated fully into their new textual surroundings. Every quotation needs to have your own words appear in the same sentence. So you might read a quotation from an article and it immediately makes you think something. And I might read that exact same quotation and think something totally different because we all have our own experiences and background and biases, and as readers, we interpret things in different ways. For example, if my husband says, "I will be there in just a minute," that can mean different things than if I say, "I will be there in just a minute." Or if, it depends on your perspectives. And so here are some suggestions. Like, whether you're doing quotations or paraphrasing, you've got to give some context. You've got to lay it out and be direct with what you're saying. Remember, academic writing likes conciseness and it likes clarity. And so here are some excellent ways to introduce a quotation or paraphrase. So X states, blah, 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 blah. As the world famous scholar X explains it, as claimed by, in her article, blank, X suggests that. Okay, so these are just some ideas. So that's for introducing the quotation. And once you've successfully introduced the quotation and used it in your sentence, it's time to explain what that quotation means, either in a general sense or in the context of your argument. So I say, in X's perspective, and then I have my direct quote, and then I'm going to explain it in my own words. I'm going to be very precise and clear why I use that information and what it has to do with what I'm writing about. So here's some ideas for explaining quotations. And I've seen this one. This is probably the one that I would use the most. I have my direct quotation or I have my paraphrase and I say, in other words, X asserts, and then I put my own words. In arguing this claim, X argues that X is insisting that what X really means is that the basis of X's argument is that. So you want to explain that information that you've just integrated into your essay. You don't want to just drop a quotation in the middle and just let it sit there by itself. You want to introduce it. You want to explain and make sure that it is built into your writing. So let's look at APA in-text citations. There are many ways to do an in-text citation. The important thing is to provide at least the author and the year. If you have a page number, provide that also. Or you can use paragraph numbers. The idea is that if I want to go to your source, I can do so easily. But you don't want to put all of that information right in the middle of your writing because that's going to be distracting and that's going to make it look ugly. It's going to make it look choppy. And so if you have a good in-text citation, I can say, okay, here is the in-text citation, here's the author and year. I can go right to your reference page and see exactly what the source is and where I can find it for further reading. So I might say, I really like this essay and I like what you've said about this topic and I want to continue learning more about it. I want to go to these sources and read these sources and get more information. You've got to make it easy for me to do that. Generally, it helps to give a little background to your source the first time you cite it, like give some credentials so that the reader can know why that person what they have to say matters. So, for example, I've got, according to Dr. Yoda, Jedi Master, or in his study, Padawans and the Dark Side, Dr. Yoda found. So I'm just giving Dr. Yoda a little bit of credential, a little bit of background, so that I can know why it's important what he's about to say. And again, don't just use a quote or paraphrase to fill a quota. Use quotes and paraphrases to add to your writing, to make your writing stronger and more credible, and to back up your ideas. You always want to back up what you're saying with research, and you always want to cite that research. And so here's kind of a chart that I've made for the elements of the in-text citation. So you want to introduce the source. So we went over some of the introductions, and you want the information, you want the citation, and then you want to incorporate it into your writing. So I've done this kind of color coded so you can kind of see in this example what I'm talking about. So here's my introduction. In a study by Dr. Dumbledore, 2018, so there's my citation, Dumbledore, 2018, and you want to keep the year close to the author as much as possible. So, in a study by Dr. Dumbledore, 2018, lead researcher at Hogwarts Medical College, so now I know who he is, excessive spell-induced concussions can lead to memory loss and/or violent tendencies. Thus, instructors at magic schools should do all that is possible to avoid spells that may cause a hard hit or concussion. So, I've got my paraphrase, and I've got, I've got further explanation. I've built it into my writing. All right, here is a common question regarding in-text citations. Can I use one citation at the end of a multiple sentence paragraph, or do I have to cite for every sentence? Seriously, go to this website. We'll click on it right now because I love this explanation of how to do that. So the author, Dennis Johnson, he explains that it can be awkward to read because technically when you are summarizing or paraphrasing or doing a direct quote of someone else's information, you need to put a citation at the end of every sentence you write. But that's choppy and it's awkward, but it's technically correct. You can't just put a citation at the end of a paragraph because then I'm not sure which part is being cited and which part is your own ideas. So, for example, he gives this example of doing this. So he has all this information about frogs and at the very end puts Williamson 2010. So I am left as a reader going, okay, all of this is from this source. Like, should it be in quotations? I don't know. Like, there's too much confusion as to where the information came. So this is the correct but ugly version. Do you see all these direct quotes? We've got a direct, or do you see all these citations? Sorry, there's 1, there's 2, there's 3, and in this short paragraph, that's just, it's choppy and it doesn't look very nice, but it is technically correct because I'm giving credit to the source where I need to give credit. And so here he gives some samples of better ways to do that so that it's correct, it's formatted correctly, and it looks good, and it's not choppy. It makes sense. It's easy to read, because that's your biggest thing, is you want to give credit where credit is due, and you want your writing to flow. You want it to be easy to read and comprehend. So let's go back. I would really recommend going to that website, though. This is my go-to website whenever students have this question. I always recommend this website, and I think it will really help you in your writing and in your citations to go take a look at that and really study it. So go check that out. Now, your in-text citations, the whole purpose of them is to direct you to the reference page. And so your reference page is on its own page, and I've got an example here of a reference page, and there's a video here that you can watch about how to do a reference page. So it comes at the end of your paper. It should be on its own page. It should just say references at the top of the page, centered. You don't bold it, you don't do anything special, you just write references centered at the top. You do not number or bullet your list of references. The first line should not be indented, but the following lines of each reference should be. In Microsoft Word, this would be called the hanging indent. References are generally formatted with the last name of the author, first name initial, period, the year, period, the title of the article, period, and then the location of publication. There are various formats depending on the type of sources. You can refer to your APA manual, and I've got some pages here where you'll find a lot of reference examples. And if you don't know how to do a reference, it doesn't hurt to Google how to reference a magazine in APA format, or how to do a reference for an interview in APA format. You can look in your APA manual, you can do an internet search to find your answers, but the more you do this, the more comfortable you'll be with it and the easier it will be. And just a side note on my references, in presentations, I haven't quite figured out how to do the hanging indent. So just know that it should have the hanging indent, but on this platform, I'm just not quite sure how to do that. So those are my references. If you have any questions, please let me know. But just remember, above all, when in doubt, cite, and you'll do well in your essay. Thanks.